right. For anyone that didn't catch the last panel, I'll just tell you super fast who I am. I'm Jay Donovan. I write for TechCrunch as a freelancer for a long time, since 2009. But I also have former lives in payments and retail and whatnot. And so today, we're going to talk about harnessing mobile to create a better, more personal retail experience. And we have some guys that know quite a bit about how the technology of mobile and payments goes along through that, all along that path. So I'm going to just let these guys introduce themselves. First, I'll say Sammy Zafar is director at Edgar, Dunn Company, and he's gonna talk today. And Michael Pellegrino, who's a global business development at iconectiv, and then Jim Greenwell is president and CEO of Danal. So did I say it right? Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure. So Sammy, go ahead and tell us what you do and what your company does, so people have like an understanding of your backgrounds.
Sure, thank you, Jay. So as Jay said, I'm a director in Edgar, Dunn Company, which is a strategy consulting company which focuses on financial services, and we have a sweet spot in payments. And I lead our global advanced payments practice, doing a lot of work with banks, but also increasingly with non-banks, particularly mobile operators and technology companies looking at new ways to do mobile commerce.
Okay. Jim?
Thanks, Jay. I'm Jim Greenwell, CEO of Danal. And the best way to think of us is, well, Facebook, Google try to sort of own the consumer experience and the consumer data. Not everybody has a Facebook page, not everybody Googles, but everybody does have a phone number. So our goal is to take that phone number, wrap an identity around it for a variety of things, like e-commerce, like making the consumer experience on a digital site much easier, and of course, without fraud. So that's the best way to think of us.
Thanks.
Yep.
Mike Pellegrino, working with iconectiv. We're one of the sponsors here, obviously. We've been part of the telecommunications ecosystem for about 30 years, managing about a billion transactions on a daily basis, so connecting customers through multiple networks. We manage a lot of registries, a lot of phone number management, number portability. We're part of that overall telecommunications ecosystem that manages the primary source of data and distributes it correctly.
So I kind of was like, in my mind, I wrote the one sentence, like, what do you guys do, so I understand. And I want to see if this is accurate, because, Jim, a lot of there was a security angle to what you guys did, and it's kind of like, who are you? Who you have this number. You guys do a lot more than that. That's a big simplification, because you had told me, well, yeah, it is a lot about security. We follow through with a lot of other stuff too, but I was thinking of it. Who are you? Michael, and your company is kind of like, well, here's how we get to and from these places. Here's where the data goes. And then Sammy was more about like, and then how do you pay at the end? And I think you said, well, that's where you said, yeah, we touch on how you pay a little bit too.
Sure, and absolutely. In fact, our heritage is in the carrier billing space, where if you bought a digital good, you could settle to your monthly phone bill. We've since sold that division, and our primary focus, if you think about, there's a great quote by the director of the NSA that said, there's two groups of people in the world, those who know they've been hacked and those who don't know they've been hacked, right? But if you think about the security world, you hear a lot about fraudulent activities, you hear a lot about abandonment for the mobile cart. As far as we know, the SIM card has not been hacked yet. There's arguments that it has been, but technically it hasn't. We know that the carrier networks are still pretty holistic. They spend a lot of money with it, and we just arbitrage off of that. We partner with the carriers. They have a lot of information on people. Obviously, they guard it closely. They're not going to sell it like a Google traditional marketing advertising. In fact, they're highly regulated. But they have a lot of information, and they're very, very safe. And so that's what we try to leverage. We work with Western Union, with PayPal, with other firms we can't mention, banks, financial institutions, to make their consumers' experience safe. Dare I use the word frictionless, but really we're in stream where it's not a friction moment for the consumer. And there's also regulatory things we address, KYC, okay. TCPA, compliance type stuff.
Cool. Well, you mentioned experience, right? consumer experience. And that's one of the big things we're going to talk about in this panel. We talked about it a little bit too in the panel I was just on, and I think that's a testament to how important it is to pay attention to what people want. They want less friction. They want things to work. They want a good experience. And so in terms of retail and mobile, to paraphrase what the synopsis of this panel is supposed to be about, it's that competition between online vendors and brick and mortar stores is more intense than ever, and I think everybody can recognize that. If you read any news stories, you can see daily how, Amazon is circumventing this brick and mortar retailer, or there's competition and it's fierce. Now, physical stores are looking for ways to have this digital layer on top of their existing, brick and mortar location. And that's one of the opportunities is to make those operations newer and neater for consumers is potentially mobile payments. And so the key thing to remember in this conversation is, does a digital layer on the physical world change how we shop and spend? And that's kind of the mantra for this conversation.
Let me give you some stats before I turn it over to the colleagues here.
Yeah.
So I think last year globally, so according to LexisNexis, there was $26 billion in fraud. So
26 billion in fraud?
In fraud, okay. Fraudulent activity. And for every dollar of fraud, it has a 3x multiplier. So for an enterprise, it would cost $3 to fix that, to have the resources to fix it, to process. Additionally, sort of to your concept, globally, abandonment on the shopping cart was roughly $5 trillion. Now that's 5x of the global, shopping success. So what that tells you is that there's still inefficiencies there. There's still a struggle with the consumer to say, all right, I want this item. When I go to checkout, I have to input, Jim Greenwell. I'm going to abandon it. So abandonment's still high, right? Brick and mortar still has a use. Certainly for me, I love to go into Best Buy, find the best deal, and then shop online and get it, right? So I think there's still some transition we're going through between the brick and mortar and the digital world. The digital world hasn't quite figured it out yet, and I think it will in the next 10 years.
Yeah. What do you guys think about in terms of how digital lays over top of this layer on top of the real world, whatever that. You're seeing, there's some things you've seen that you think are causing a good consumer experience, top of mind? Sammy, anything?
I think we all talk about omni-channel a lot, so that these two channels are not in conflict anymore. They're basically sort of going side by side, and you can do web rooming and and showrooming and stuff. You can search on one and then come and pick it up from the store. Mm-hmm. So there is synergy between the two. But I personally think that both channels have their own strengths. And we should actually leverage those strengths. I think from a payment perspective, they will merge. But from a consumer experience perspective, I think retailers are going to develop completely different experiences in these two different areas. Because look at, in the shops you have, basically it's to get footfall. It's somehow to get people in there. You can do all sorts of different things if it's, augmented reality or whatever. But it's trying to get people in. Whereas on an online experience, the key thing is not to get the consumer go away. So as Jim was saying, trying not to have cart abandonment, okay. And make it easy for them to buy something.
So maybe two different goals. There's not a one-size-fits-all approach. Hence omni-channel. You do things differently for the consumer, so the consumer doesn't have to do as much work, right?
Right. Okay. Absolutely.
What about?
Well, yeah, I think that's true. They're different silos in many cases. But omni-channel is becoming reality. When it comes to the brand communication needs to be consistent no matter what the channel is. So if you're walking into a retail store, your experience in the retail environment needs to be very, very similar or consistent with what you see on the internet and vice versa. And now it's all merging as far as the mobile device is concerned. It's merging to the mobile device. So access to digital channels that are commerce-enabled on the internet and information that resides within the store environment, the retail environment, is going to be consistent. Maybe there's a better location device that's going to be provided from a mobile phone to find the product you're looking for, but price comparisons and all those kinds of things are going to be integrated into the content delivered from the brand.
Okay, so So are you saying like context of what you're doing is important for the messaging to be aligned with what
Correct.
the thing that you're trying to do at the time? Okay, and that's
I'd like to follow up with that.
Yeah, add on to it.
It's a great point. And I think it even challenges the traditional systems in place. Advertising, for example. I mean, I'd love to see a company like iconectiv and Mike. If you think about the advertising, I mean, how many people sort of, if there's a 15-second ad, will either put it away, wait till it's over, find something distraction. But there's some interesting things we can do with meta trends, metadata that I think iconectiv has. If you're watching a show and you like the shoes that somebody's wearing, there should be some meta trends that say, right, I'd like to buy those shoes in my personal advice, or maybe even make it interactive. That's coming. That's probably a few years out, but that all requires a certain amount of data and maybe even changing the model of advertising.
Yeah, and I think just going even a little further with direct response advertising, direct response has got new ways of getting directly to the products. So I'm spending a bunch of time with common short codes right now that have been around for 14 years, but there's now new utilizations associated with common short codes where you can drive a direct response mechanism without having an elaborate back-end loyalty program associated with it, and also gather some consumer information on the fly immediately to understand what that transaction looks like and what future behavior potentially will be. So direct response through mobile phones, tied to retail, tied to online, if you begin to put all this data together, this metadata together, begin to get a better understanding of the consumer.
So this kind of leads toward personalization a little bit. You know, if you want to know, if you want to have, as a brand, if you want to have context about what people are doing, you kind of need to know some things about them. They need to reveal some things to you, and you need to ask for them, I think, in the right ways, so that they are willing to give you some info. There's a stat I read recently that Forbes detailed that 71% of Americans who own smartphones sleep with them, physically in bed with them. And another 3% are holding it in their hands while they sleep. We're talking about that's a whole new level of personal, right? Personalization. Your phone is so personal to you that you're actually sleeping with in bed with you. But if it's that personal, why are there sometimes some hang-ups when it comes to payments and people revealing some information to have a better payments experience when they will let this device, into their most intimate, life? So what are what are your thoughts on that? What's holding up payments?
I think the payments. You don't wake up in the morning thinking, I would love to get a new way to make a payment. You basically
right. You don't, do you?
You just don't want.
I guess I never woke up. And it's like,
you just want to get the thing
to pay in a new way.
Exactly, and I have to learn in something new. So you just want to do something. You want to buy something, and then you want the payment to just take place in the background, without you actually thinking about it. So in a way, for example, we talk about Uber, and the great thing about Uber is that you can just take a taxi and then just walk out without bothering to pay. And OpenTable is doing that as well, where you go to a restaurant, you order your food, and then you can just leave. So I think payment is going to become, again, we talked about frictionless being a buzzword, but I think people would like payments to be as effortless as possible. And the problem with mobile payments is that, first of all, it's not effortless. Secondly, it's not the way we do things normally. We pay with credit cards. So, for example, in the London Underground, which allows Apple Pay and it's all contactless and everything, people usually don't pay with Apple Pay or anything because I don't want to take this big phone out and just tap it on the turnstile. I'm just used to taking out my card and just tapping it. So in payments, the problem, the incumbent payment method has really a massive advantage. Unless something really makes my life easier, much, much easier, I'm not going to use that. And that's the thing we always forget, and that's why payments is the biggest graveyard of innovation. So many companies have so much investment in there, and they've just gone because they didn't really solve a problem for the consumer. Right. Or do something which makes their life easier than before.
The solution looking for a problem.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. But so you raise a point that the value proposition has to be right for the consumer, right? Taking your phone out of your pocket or taking a card out of your pocket it has to be, essentially, it has to be easier to use your phone for some reason than a card. Or there has to be some value laying on top of it that causes you to think, I'm going to use that. And I can think of an example. In a former life, I worked at a company called Alliance Data, and they do private label cards. And we built a mobile payments platform for them so that people could use specialty cards to pay in store. What we noticed, this was really interesting to me, was that when people used the digital version of their specialty card, and I'm talking about a card that only works in that store, a private label card, the Pottery Barn card, the Victoria's Secret card, the Express card. When people use the digital card versus the plastic card, they bought more stuff. I think it was 20% more. And what we thought at that time, we were like, I think this is because people know how much money they have to spend because the balance showed up on the digital version of the card instead of the plastic card, which was static. So they had more information, and it caused them to do something. So what do you guys think? What are some of the value adds that mobile payments can provide beyond getting it out of your pocket? Are there other things you've seen or are thinking about where it can become more valuable as a way to pay?
I mean, so let's be clear. In most cases, the consumer will drive demand. In this case, specifically mobile payments, I don't think that's the case. Sam talked about conditioning, and I think that's absolutely right. I think we as consumers are conditioned, but it's such a highly regulated space. And let's be clear, mobile payments failed. I mean, sort of Apple reached down and sort of brought back life to it, and there's a resurgence. But Apple, I think, is concerned mostly about the Apple brand. So even the fraud on Apple Pay, for example, there was a debate as to whether Apple should solve that or a lot of the issuing banks should solve that, which in effect own the payment processing in the background. So not only do you have the consumer, but you have all the interconnections that are highly regulated, that have things in place that are going to influence whether this gets adopted or not. There's the technology, there's the handsets, there's federal law, international law. So it's a lot of elements. It's not consumer driven.
Right.
And
silly regulations.
And I think the bane of any mobile payment is the registration process. And if you think about why Google, in my view, why Google Payments failed is, I don't want to give my information to Google because I know what they're going to do with it. They're going to advertise to me. They're going to want my information to. The fact is, with Apple, for the customers they have a lot of information. My wife, to add on to Mike, they have her credit card. I mean, she shops. Let's see. I think Facebook, Amazon, and Apple are one of the few companies that can get away with the registration process for mobile payments. And I think all will try. Google, I don't think will succeed.
Well, since you mentioned Apple Pay, in the news, yesterday you couldn't even get away from the onslaught of all of the information about the iPhone 7, and one of the things they mentioned was kind of in passing was Apple Pay, some updates where they're going to support the Felica chips in Japanese phones. So they're kind of, are they opening up their really super closed NFC platform right now? Maybe a little bit. I don't know. Also, their Apple Pay. This has been announced before, but there was more new information about it yesterday. Apple Pay is now available in a browser. So they kind of did the opposite, right? Normally, it seems like everyone starts with an e-commerce, a remote commerce, e-commerce system, and then they add a mobile payment afterward. They kind of started with the Apple Pay first, and now they've come back to making it enabled in a browser. And so it feels like a really complete product to me now. And so my question is kind of, what's that going to mean? Is Apple Pay really going to become a global payments process for everyone in the whole world? Are you guys bullish, or what do you think? Is it whoever wants to say?
Oh yeah, I mean,
Mike
sorry.
after that. No, Mike after that.
I think first Japan. Japan does payments this way, and the rest of the world does payments totally differently. So Japan has its own standards. It has its own way of doing things. Docomo owns like 90% of the payment networks. They actually also own a bank as well. So in Japan, the technology was the Leica technology that you were saying. So Apple had no choice but to go with that if they wanted to break into Japan. And Japan is mainly an iPhone country, which is not the case in many other countries. So Japan was an isolated example. But I think when Apple Pay goes into other markets, it will have massive challenges because for two things. First of all, not in every market is the iPhone the major device. In many markets,
It's expensive, right?
it's
Like,
expensive, yes, and in Scandinavia, it's the key device, but rest of Europe and other places, it's not the main device. So that's one issue. Secondly, in many countries, Visa and MasterCard don't hold the payment rails the way they hold it in the US. It's bank consortiums that actually, and they can actually put a lot of hurdles on their way, because remember, Apple Pay and others work on tokenization. And it's Visa and MasterCard enabled tokenization in the US and other countries, but in many other countries, bank switches will have to enable that. So Apple Pay is going to have a lot of issues in other markets.
yeah. Mike, anything you want to add, like in terms of what you think about Apple Pay?
Yeah, if I'm trying to expand my my mobile pay, Apple probably selected the most challenging environment. Japan, okay, it's pervasive. Commerce over the mobile phone is pervasive, so it's a great test bed to see if it's worth expanding beyond what their footprint is. I'm not a big believer that Apple's going to expand dramatically outside of their device base. I think they're going to stay encapsulated. But if I want to test it out, Japan's probably the best place to do that.
Just one more point about Japan. I think the funny thing about Japan is that it's a heavily cash-based country. It's such a developed country, but everybody uses cash to make payments. Housewives take cash when they go to the supermarket during the day from an ATM. They would go and buy stuff and then come back and deposit the rest of the cash in an ATM. So it's a very heavy. If you go to Japan, you won't be able to get cash out with your Visa and MasterCard cards, because the system is very different.
Right.
The way they encode the mag stripe and everything is totally different. So you can only go to 7-Eleven to get cash out. So it's just a very, very, very different economy.
Yeah, and when I think about like payments being global, I often think about unbanked areas of the world or Africa, where I wonder to myself, M-Pesa is very entrenched there, and in South America, they're like Movilway, I think, is another one where they've already have these ecosystems built, and they use these cheap phones. Like they just really need a cellular connection, right, to do sending information back and forth about what your account balance is. And I wonder, like, will a $650, that's the cheap phone, is that gonna just hold them back? Or maybe Apple doesn't even care. Maybe they're like, we'll focus on, we're not trying to win everything. We're trying to win where it's most lucrative, or I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud about that, but I wonder.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, just a quick comment on
Yeah.
M-Pesa. I mean, M-Pesa solved a problem clearly for consumers because people they didn't have any bank accounts or any cards, but when they went to a market town to sell their stuff, they didn't want to carry cash on the bus back. So basically, they would deposit the cash with a human ATM. Because it's based on agents, and just use SMS, and you get an SMS back saying that the cash has been deposited. You come back to your village, and you go to another human ATM, and you get your cash out. So that's how it started. But now, it's 30% of Kenya's GDP runs on M-Pesa. So it's a very focused solution, and basically all this was started by carriers, mobile carriers. But now banks have also started taking the lead in many markets in this area. So it's a totally different solution to what Apple Pay and others are doing.
Yeah. Two more questions so we can leave a little bit of time for any questions from the audience. One thing is there are a myriad of these retail-based app payment schemes in the market today. Things like, Walmart Pay, Target Pay. There was the big collective that's kind of not as active. Currency, not as active anymore. I'm not sure what that's doing. But these retailers love to keep their databases private, right? They're the ones that get the data when people use these kind of payment schemes. And so when it's really private like that, what does that mean for innovation? When the data is not when they're keeping track of all that internally and hiding it, what does it mean for innovation in payments? And Jim, why don't you?
Sure. So interestingly, I don't think it was about innovation with currency, which I think is pretty much defunct now.
Yeah.
But with currency, it was about interchange. It was, hey,
Yeah,
Visa,
just trying to get-
MasterCard. Yeah.
stick
Why
it
am
to
I
the man.
paying the
Yeah,
2 points here? So I thought that was interesting play to sort of own that piece. But you're right. Information is power. It's power in advertising. It's power in targeted. But I talking about articles I read. For those of you who have a Facebook page, Facebook knows a lot about you. They know a lot about you. In terms of digital advertising, I think it's 2/3 of the market. Well, between Google, Facebook, and one other firm, it's 2/3 of the market. Amazon. The third's battled by sort of the second tier and third tier. But there's 60 data elements that they know very personal information about you. And I think that's what ultimately is the battle. It's between having data on you, right? And so that therefore they can advertise to you, have more direct marketing for you. And that data ownership is power.
Okay.
It's the power to sell.
He who has the data, she who has the data controls. You guys agree, or is there any nuance to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I'm a firm believer in that. I always have been. I think there's also different agendas. I mean, if you look at Walmart Pay, I don't believe they were so concerned about the consumer experience rather than moving the lines faster. So there was some operational decisions that they made from their payments schema. I think the biggest untapped area for the retail marketplace in mobile payments is tapping into the co-op advertising dollars that sit there that are underutilized. So I think Walmart's starting to take a look at that. Is there a way to direct a transaction or a purchase or a coupon within the store environment and get them out of the store very, very quickly with their payment scheme while capturing the data? So the entire ecosystem within Walmart, they want to touch all aspects of it. And I think that's what they're trying to do with the payment system.
Like super efficient.
Super efficient.
We get the most data, you get the fastest,
Fastest,
frictionless.
most productive.
Frictionless. That's an imaginary word, right? It doesn't. That's the. Do you anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think data has a lot of promise, but right now it has massive hype as well. I mean, we shop with a supermarket called Tesco, which is, I think, the world's third largest supermarket in the UK. And at the end of the month, they send me an email with possible offers for me. And not a single offer has got anything to do with what I buy. I think they use the data to actually stack the shelves, how properly and how to charge the brands that sell through Tesco. But I think we're a long way away from really data being so powerful. Right now, I think 95% of the data that we have, we just are not able to use it properly.
Missed opportunity.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Last question is, so some of those payment schemes are very private, very hoarding of data, but if we compare that to new approaches like blockchain or something, right? And I'm not a blockchain expert by any means. I do know that it's kind of the opposite, where like the more public the ledger is, the more public the payments are, the better, the more secure it is, because there's transparency and you can know what people are doing. And it's the opposite, right? And it seems counterintuitive that the more public it would be, the more safe it is. But is it poised to reach more acceptance because of its public, the public way that it works? How far away are we from where it's like a real payment option? What do you think? Any like?
I mean, I think a lot of money's been soaked into, blockchain. And I think 20 years ago, the European community started something called Target 2, which they invested a bunch of money in as well. But I don't see traction yet. I mean, I think that's all they're doing. They're taking, versus a centralized ledger, they're going to a distributed model that's supposed to increase efficiencies. But invested a lot of time and money. I see banks investing in it as well, but I don't see them using it, right? They're still small. So is there a chance? Sure. There's an efficiency play with blockchain. I'm not sure it's going to,
Yeah, not quite yet.
not quite the game changer that everybody thinks, but maybe my colleagues have a different view.
Yeah, no, I fully agree. I think the blockchain was basically developed for Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is not solving a demand issue. It's solving a political dream
Underground drug dealing.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, demand is coming from those websites, but the real dream came from libertarians, from this country, who basically said, I hate the government. I hate anything centralized. So let me think of a very convoluted, difficult system that basically takes out a central authority out of the system. Hence, I have Bitcoin. And who needs a system without a central authority? All the people who are trying to avoid a central authority. So it's actually good for countries that are falling apart because people don't want to, their bank accounts are useless, like Cyprus, happened with Cyprus. So they put their money in Bitcoin. But blockchain basically is a decentralized ledger. But what the banks are now getting interested in is something different. It's a little bit wider than blockchain, as you mentioned, distributed ledgers. So instead of just having one centralized ledger, if you have distributed ledgers, it makes it slightly easier, more efficient to keep track of transactions, and they could be permissioned. So blockchain is permissionless, which means it's open. Anybody can write to it, and anybody can read it. But the way the banks are thinking of these will be permission, so only part of the entities, part of the banking industry will be able to take a look at it. So distributed ledgers are very different, and I do believe they have quite a lot of application in financial services going in the future.
Okay. All right, anyone have anything else to
If
add?
it doesn't work, it's going to end up a great barter platform.
Okay.
Really what it comes down to.
Good point.
Barter, just like the Middle Ages.
Barter and
digital
trade.
Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a couple minutes left. Do you guys want to ask any questions to anyone here, right here, down front? Might have a microphone, but you just yell loudly.
I'm pretty loud. I liked how you set it up at the beginning of the discussion where you're saying that retail stores are looking for ways to add the digital layer to the customer experience. Given that, what would you say the success inhibitors are in the local landscape? Where will retailers be challenged?
Okay, so the question is, where will retailers be challenged? Say, one.
Where will retailers be challenged in terms of extending the customer experience? Where are
Okay.
they having the most difficulty right now?
Yeah, do you guys have anything to think about there?
Where would you rather shop? At a store or on this, little device where once you decide what you want, you have to now, input your name, your
Right.
address, all that registration, the R word as I call it, right? Obviously, there's ways to help, and we're trying to affect that. But I think at the core, that's the fundamental issue.
And I think a lot of companies believe that if there is a seamless tie-in to their loyalty programs that they currently have, then it's going to make a lot more sense because then they can deliver personalized information utilizing the data directly to the customer that's in the store environment.
Yeah, I'll add on to that too, that if you think about it, I always break up commerce into two kinds of ways these days, like remote commerce, right, where it could be e-commerce or m-commerce or virtual commerce, where you are someplace else, and then on-site commerce, which is shopping, like we've always done. Like for 10,000 years, you go to a place, someone has something, and you interact and buy something from them. We're kind of used to that, I think. This is my opinion. We're used to that, and that feels good, and it feels like a human way that we purchase. So when that's not lost and there's a value add from a digital component, then that makes people, it gives them something they can't get from the regular experience. And when it's easy enough, they'll do it, I think. But making it easy is the challenge, right? And I don't think everyone's got that. Right. There are people working on that, retailers. Any question in the back?
Okay, yeah, I got the mic for you here. There you go. So you mentioned the example of the failure of the supermarket environment and their ability to harvest information and deliver something to you that was meaningful to you via email at the end of the month. If you look at somebody like Amazon, where we know their prowess in the desktop environment of providing retargeting that's pretty phenomenal and very applicable. And then you look at your mobile experience, though, and their ability through their recommendation engines. You've got to think that's a pretty amazing model, maybe sparse in the landscape of things, but could anyone talk a little bit about their success and maybe thoughts about Amazon?
I wish my wife were here. She's the expert on Amazon Prime. But again, I mentioned 3 companies that can get away with a successful mobile payments, mobile shopping platform. It's Facebook, it's Amazon, and Apple, and potentially Google. It's because they've mastered the registration process. Amazon has a ton of information, and they've been very masterful at knowing, as you say, targeted, the Prime. They made it easy, but it's also been a 10-year investment for them, and they've had a very long-term view. I mean, full credit to them. I'm not sure a lot of companies have I call the chutzpah to be able to do something like that. And they invest long-term, and I think you can see the results there. That's my 2 cents.
I can talk a little bit about the grocery environment. Amazon's got a huge benefit in that everything is centralized in one repository and one database. With the grocery store environment, where there's thousands of brands sitting out there and there's IRI data with your little scans on your cans that are going through the register, that's going into a separate environment. So putting all that data together is something that Amazon does phenomenally well because they have the ability to do that. So more cooperation in the retail environment between the brand ownership of the data and the transactional part of the consumer experience needs to be integrated much better. And right now it's very difficult with the abstract silos of data that are out there.
Okay, that's going to do it for us. How about a nice round of applause for Jay Donovan and the panel?
Guys.